Welcome back. You're still watching Citizen Planet here as we wait for the start of the Climate Summit. Africa, that's the name. Everybody says it should be global. We're with Boz here, Benjamin and Emmanuel, and we were talking about with the food security, the agricultural practices that we are using to grow food. And during the break, an interesting conversation came up. And Emmanuel, I want to tap into that because a food business is quite lucrative, especially if you're talking about imports. Yeah. If you want to be rich, at least in Kenya, you can import and sell sugar. You can import and sell maize. You can do the same with wheat. Yeah. Why is it not as lucrative to grow sugar, grow wheat, grow maize and sell to the market in Kenya?
Well, I think one of the challenges that we have is most of the politicians who get into power try to find a way of making their own money without considering the population, the countrymen. So you find that these people will only focus on trying to kill the companies that are working, the organizations that are producing the needful things in the country, and then they try and import it using a different means. So they end up selling it to the people who are supposed to get the same thing from their own country because their country can give them in plenty. So you find that while time goes by, people get to the extent that they're used to getting things from outside. So we now import rice, we import sugar, we import wheat, we import almost so many things that are basic that can be produced in our country. And one of the things that we were discussing during this break is that if we can encourage the young people, the young generation to get into agriculture, get into farming, we don't have to focus on getting white-collar jobs for everyone, but we can try and find a way of generating income through agriculture, something that is supposed to be in us. I think one of the things that we can try and focus on is having our own African agrarian revolution, where we're trying to get food in a sustainable way for the future so that we can sustain ourselves at the moment. And while considering climate change, I think it's a good. It will be a very good initiative if the young people could, stand up, rise up, and try and assist each other in doing the same things that our grandparents have been doing over the years, instead of us exporting jobs to some other country somewhere else, and we can do the same thing here.
For farming to make sense as a business, agribusiness, someone mentioned it. Is it you? I don't know who. For it to make sense, it has to have returns, but also you need capital. The young people are not necessarily the best endowed in terms of resources. Yeah. How do we come up with a plan that is sustainable, but also encouraging the younger generation to get into that?
Well, I think we've been having that challenge for quite a while. And if I can echo the climate summit that we are having in our country this week, the climate financing aspect should actually focus on trying to find a way to encourage these young people into getting into farming. For instance, someone can come from a remote country, a remote place somewhere in this country, and he or she wants to do farming because it's something in his or her blood, but they cannot go ahead with it because they do not have the funds. They do not have the capital, as you've mentioned. And the government does not support this young generation, mostly in terms of agriculture, because we are seeing that certain industries that are supposed to actually work for the benefit of the people are being closed. For instance, there was a time I went to the south coast of the south coast part of Kenya, and there's a factory called Ramesi. It used to produce sugar some time back. And the people living around there used to benefit in it, trying to do agriculture in the sense that they're selling sugarcane to the factory, and it produced sugar. But this factory was closed. And we have so many other examples that we have very good industries that are closed that could be helping the young generation. So if people are thinking of doing agriculture and you don't have funds, and at the same time, the government is not offering opportunities for you to sell your products, so these people are not going to do the thing anymore. They're going to focus on other things that are out there, especially in terms of technology, where everyone now is heading towards.
Interesting. And Boz, because in this country, if there are people that want to make business from agriculture, they either go to poultry because they will have cash flow once you sell your eggs or once you sell your animals. They'll go into dairy, again, because of questions of cash flow and access to the market, but then also horticultural products. Mainly that's where they will go to pursue agribusiness. But if you look at the country, the biggest imports are actually the starch side of food. Are there solutions that exist so that to encourage the younger generation to have the patience to invest, but also for them to also access the arable land, which is not necessarily available for them?
What you just said, you used the word cash flow like 4 times, and that's the most attractive part. Everybody, young and old, would like to make money. So you cannot just go into agriculture business as a charity. It has to be making money. But I think the point, and I'm glad that you mentioned it, we have really to be very deliberate as governments to set in policies that are very, very targeted on how to attract and incentivize youth to engage in agriculture. So the areas you've just mentioned, poultry, horticulture, dairy, some of them do not require a lot of effort. They do not require a lot of startup cash. And that's why they will easily go there. So what we've been trying to promote on the continent is really be able to be deliberate in terms of policy decisions by government that are targeting youth. What are the major challenges? We call them lack of productive assets, access to productive assets, mainly land, mainly income, cash, money. Because, when you're able to go to the bank to look for money, you require collateral security. The youth, the women we're talking about, don't have those products. But as a government, you can be very deliberate to put in incentives that if you are a youth, either in an organized form or you're an individual, you can access a bank or any financial facility. You'll be able to get this particular loan facility at either no or different interest rate. And you can even provide in particular models that allow you to be able to use your own farm as collateral without being challenged on what you are going to be paying it back with. And again, it's bringing this with the digital kind of approaches where the youth can be able to not only access land and money without challenges of the collateral security, but begin to ensure that you work on other areas. Because one of the big challenges is not just increasing productivity alone by the youth, is the way the market is functioning. Once the youth begin to know that actually the market for these particular agricultural products exists, they will be compelled to go and look for their right seeds. So to your point, why aren't we seeing young people going into like a large-scale maize growing or wheat growing? These are rich. They require a lot of capital. They require a lot of land. And you cannot do that unless you have either land or you have a lot of capital. And these are limited areas. So I think we have to be very deliberate to say, how can you really incentivize youth to invest in large-scale rice production, large-scale maize production? It's just a land base. You cannot grow all this in space. You can't grow this without money. So it's, again, this is a policy issue. It has to be very deliberate. We have to get out of the comfort of allowing agriculture as a private business. And therefore, everybody has to smell where that opportunity exists. But if you allow everybody to smell where the business exists, then the youth will be differentiated. They will not have that opportunity. So what we mean by policy is really understanding where the challenge is and be able to be deliberate and put and say, we will have a youth fund, for example, that any group of youth that are interested in growing or investing in large-scale maize production will be able to access this fund. Or any group of youth or youth in this particular geography that are interested in growing this particular will be able to access the land. In fact, one of the recent discussions is what we call land rental markets. You do not have to own land to be able to be a large-scale producer. There are so many people who have a lot of pieces of land that are lying idle, and then they are only challenged by compromising the ownership of that land. So what we're trying to put in place in most of the government is creating a land policy that does not compromise the owner in terms of ownership, but it creates and generates what we call rents. I can come to your home, take your land, begin to cultivate and increase rice or maize production. It remains your land. Then we agree on particular principles upon which we are going to share the benefits out of that land. So production increases, and then ownership is not compromised. So these are some of the policies that we really need to be very deliberate and make sure that governments are able to incentivize this landscape.
And it is possible to make such kind of production profitable?
It is very possible. it has worked elsewhere. You see, agriculture, most of the lack of profitability comes in the way we use inefficient use of our inputs. In many cases, you find like fertilizer access to seed, labor itself can be expensive. So if you really don't find the optimal mix of how you can reduce production cost, and if the markets are functioning, it is very profitable. It has worked in some of the cases. That's why people are there. Some of those who make money are making big money, not small money. So we really need to encourage that, and really those models that are working, scale them up.
Right. Most
of the youth we talk about do not know that some of these practices are actually working. Yeah.
Yet, Benjamin, if you look at the image behind Boaz there, one side is green, the other one is how it looks. This is likely to be the same location at different times. Why? Because much of agriculture depends on rain. There's a promise or a dream that is older than 10 years in this country. We are going to irrigate 1 million acres of land. It was made by the Jubilee administration during the campaigns of 2012, 2013. Never became. What is stopping us from getting there? And what should be? Because he talks about policies. But should government go directly to invest in such kind of program? For instance, what is happening at Galana, initially it was the government getting in there to till the land, but now there's a different format where private entities are being given space to go and do that. What works? What should work?
Yeah, so maybe interestingly what I'll say is in terms of policies as a country, we are not badly off. In terms of the implementation, that's our biggest challenge. A number of times I have had people mention the same thing, and even in opportunities we have been in forums locally and out of the country, it is very clear Kenya is strong on policies on a number of sectors. So even when we talk about being able to irrigate all those hectares of land, it's not that it's not possible. I think we can look at the case in point when we talk about the oncoming El Nino. We need to ask ourselves, are we ready for it? Where will all these cubic meters of water go to? Because a number of times you would see it rain and this water just goes down the drain. But if we're able to have strong infrastructure in terms of how we could be able to harvest water, how we could be able to store water, then this is something that is actually possible. So that in terms of areas whereby it is the arid and semi-arid lands, they could be able to do farming all year throughout. When we take a case study of a country like Israel, they have hacked it. So why can't we hack it? So it is something that is actually doable. We need to transition from a point of being fully transactional. Transactional in this sense whereby it is all about the money. The level of inclusion that we have when it comes to resources needs to have a level of equity. So that a case like for a project like the Galana one, why can we not say probably even have another similar project in an arid region like in the coastal area, in the eastern area? These are things that are doable and actually could feed these counties. So for me, it's government to be able to enforce these policies.
Right.
We need to walk the talk. We talk too much. Even for me, the climate summit, yes, there will be talks, but let's walk the talk so that it is not just an event.
Okay.
Yeah, so for me, in fact, for me, the biggest takeaway around the summit is for all players, all participants to be able to walk the talk. So that at the end of the day, all these policies, all these proposals that we have that look good on paper, look good as we talk, we could actually see their end results at the completion of these projects or after some timelines. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Let's step back a little bit and define what exactly climate change is, because we may sit here and talk about the Africa Climate Summit, but what exactly is it for a Kenyan to understand what you're talking about? Boaz?
You see, when I grew up in southwestern Uganda, we used to graze cattle, go and harvest, and we used to have 2 seasons of rain every year. So food was never a challenge. You know, this rain comes, the plants will grow, you get the food, livestock will find water. But increasingly, and I'm trying to bring this into the understanding from a layman's perspective, increasingly we see there's only one season. The question is, what is happening? what could have actually disrupted the sources of the rain. A lot of science that is out there. Mm-hmm. Two, we see not only rain coming late, but it comes in big torrential environments. And when we try to study the science, they say there are lots of winds coming from different oceans, and then they're also creating floods. And even when you have grown a particular crop, it's eroded away. Mm-hmm. So the two key points, a lot of drought that is happening before compared to what we saw before. Mm-hmm. A lot, when rains come, they do not come in a pattern that actually be healthy for the crops to grow.
Right.
Something is happening. So that means the environment, the ozone layer is being disrupted. The stability of the global system is disrupted by the activities that are taking place on ground. The sun rays are not able to reach the ground and be able to hit back and clean the ozone layer for the system to be really good. Mm-hmm. That sounds a little bit of science, but so we have more droughts, we have more floods. Things cannot remain as usual. So there are lots of things, and the science has told us clearly that if, for example, you have a lot of forest, in the rainforest, the rains are better and they are good, the soils are fertile. So that's climate change. The temperatures are increasing on a regular basis, compared to the times before where there used to be a relatively cooler, warmer weather, but it's now much warmer and hotter. Mm-hmm. That means everything is not right. And that's why, again, to your good point, the climate debate and the climate discussions today mm-hmm. have to really bear in mind that it's not business as usual, that we have to do things differently. And the reason I call it the Global Summit is Africa was never a big emitter to the global climate change.
Right.
Africa was and continues to be the recipient of the challenge that happened in the global West, in the global North. Mm-hmm. And this is not just trying to blame anybody. But the way the practices are going to happen in Africa, we have to really be very careful that if Africa makes the same mistakes, the challenges are going to be very, very big. And that's why we're saying we can actually increase food for the Africans to feed themselves, being careful of disrupting the global climate, reducing the amount of carbon dioxide
right.
into the space and disrupting the ozone layer, reducing the amount of methane mm-hmm. by adopting agricultural practices like increasing irrigation, optimizing water use. I say optimizing, making sure that you are able to use water in a right way,
right.
With the right seed, increase production without really emitting a lot of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere.
Explain to us the link between the industrialization happening in the global north and the impact that has had in Africa and why this conversation about carbon trading and the proper compensation of African countries, for instance.
The carbon discussion has come in space in the sense that it becomes an incentive for any practices that you do that reduces carbon dioxide emissions. Mm-hmm. It's incentivized. That's why money is an important factor. That's why the carbon market, you are able to buy the amount of carbon dioxide that into the space and then reduce the global warming, reduce the amount of carbon that goes into the space. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a really interesting discussion, and this is where Africa needs to really be very, very careful and adopt some of these approaches in a way that is going to benefit Africa. Mm-hmm. And there are very many ways today. Increase your forest cover, reduce your cutting of forests or trees, or even encroaching on wetlands, and also making sure that some of the practices are able to enhance and cultivate behavior that people are able to see that if you are really into the carbon trade, there are benefits associated with trading in carbon. Mm-hmm. But also making sure that we are not really disrupting the environment in a way that can be... I was making a story earlier in the break that the recent Russia-Ukraine crisis has exposed to Africa some of the major challenges that we never knew. Mm-hmm. Major importers, Africa is spending over 50 billion every year mm-hmm. to import food. Larger than 60% of this 50 billion is on maize from the Russia-Ukraine environment, is rice, is wheat, is oil products, sunflower. And these are particular products that we can produce on the continent. use intensive mechanisms that you can increase this production, but be careful about how you're using your fertilizer, you're using different practices that can degrade the environment. And not only in that area, but also in the livestock, which is considered to be one of the emitters into the global space. So I think we have approaches that we can adopt.
Right.
And we're looking up to leaders this particular week to speak about what are the models that they are beginning to adopt that is going not only to increase food production for the continent, but also being careful about the environment and climate.
Okay.
So there's a huge challenge for the leaders this week to be able to really come up upright. It's not about money alone.
Right.
It's about the practices that we are doing at the continental level to make sure that we are part of the solution and we are not part of the problem.
Emmanuel, explain to us what would be your experience or lessons in as far as climate change is concerned and how it has impacted on the health of the population.
Well, as my colleague has said, climate is the change in mean and variability. Climate change is the change of the climate in terms of mean and variability. So we're having more intense activities that are coming up, like we have floods, we have storms, like last week we had one in Florida. And we have even the rising temperatures are causing effect to the vector-borne diseases, because we realize that malaria is now being found in highlands, where it wasn't there before. And as we keep on going further, it's going to impact the health of the people more and more, because the temperatures will keep on rising. We're going to have an impact on the glaciers, which are going to melt. They're going to cause some ice to melt somewhere, and it's going to add to the levels of water, which is going to affect the human population in one way or another if it goes towards land. And also, it impacts the way of our living, because people have to move from one place to another. It also causes displacement of people at the same time. And this thing is going to be more and more of it as we keep on going forward. So from my perspective, I think that we're supposed to handle climate change as a unison approach, such that we incorporate every sector of the economy into it. Because at the end of the day, we are going to have transport, we're going to have development in terms of industries, we are going to have different changes within our economy, and all these have an impact to the human health. Because if we do not do anything towards to at least support the human health, we're going to have an issue at the end of the day. We need a healthy community, a healthy country, so that we can function better.
Interesting. Yeah, but are there specific ailments or conditions that you'd say are attributable to climate change, whether remotely or directly?
Yeah, we have malaria cases, like I've mentioned, in highland places. We have the cases of cholera. We have dengue fever as well, which is actually on the rise at the moment. We have different types of diseases. Last week I was in a conference on health and climate, and there was a link that came up between climate change and cancer, some types of cancer, something that no one could really expect. But it's really happening outside there. And there's so many other cases. I remember there was a time in Thika, if I'm not so wrong, there was a girl or a lady who died because she was attributed to dying from air pollution. So it's something that's really affecting our health every day. We drive cars, we have industries, and we're seeing the most people who are going to be affected are the vulnerable ones who live mostly in the slum dwellers. We have informal settlements. Those are the people who are going to be mostly affected.
Yet, Benjamin, like in the country, Kenya, there's been a lot of cancer cases and deaths reported. The treatment success is quite low on that, but also because of late diagnosis, the challenges of affordability of health services. When you're talking about the impact of climate change on this, it sounds like a very complicated conversation. Again, how do you make it consumable by the end users? Because, I mean, it's Kenyans, it's you and I, it's the people that are in those slums that he's talking about here that are supposed to benefit from this information to make their lives and conditions better so that they don't have to suffer and become part of the statistics.
So earlier on I had mentioned about we need to demystify climate change. Climate change is not as complex as it can be, as it sounds. for it to be where it is, of course, there's research that has gone to it. And of course, the research is driven from the science point. Science is another different ballgame. Of course, there will be the statistics, there will be metrics, there will be interpretations and what have you. But then getting it to a very consumable point, I'd give an example. You could look at probably a household that is living in a rural area, even take case and point like a household in northern Kenya. No access to electricity, no access to water, no access to an energy source to cook. So what will they result to? They will probably result to using a kerosene-powered cooking source or a cook stove or the likes. What does that lead to? There is the inhalation of those fumes at the end of the day. When you look at that, there is now that to do with affecting their eyesight, that affects their respiratory organs, and much more to do with issues related to health. So that is something we cannot overlook. When you look at the aspect to do with access to water, as my colleagues have mentioned here, when one is accessing unsafe water, this will lead to sort of like other waterborne diseases and the likes. So there is that direct correlation. And it is how we package this information to the most simplest of forms that people could be able to understand it, so that even when we who are in the private sector are going out there to communicate to local communities about these are the solutions that we have, it doesn't seem like there is too much jargon that we are talking, but they can actually relate with like such case studies to be able to see that these are the alternatives that we could be able to use. So at the end of the day, you see, like for such like households, we already have solutions for them. Locally, at least, we've been able to see there is the adoption of like the LPG cooking gas, which is at a good adoption rate. But even for those who are in the rural areas where there is no access to electricity, there is innovations in terms of productive use of energy, and even to this case, solar energy. So they could still be able to use solar solutions to cook. They could be able to use solar solutions to access water for pumping, solar solutions to do climate smart farming. All this is readily available. So it's a matter of just how we package this information for their dissemination. And as I'd also earlier on said, this is something that we now need to make a norm. I say I will be happy one day when the generation younger than me can actually tell us that this is not how you should dispose waste. When your child actually tells you don't throw waste out of the vehicle, these things need to become a norm. But currently, people throwing out of waste on the streets is something that doesn't look like a big deal. So we need to have the ownership. Climate change will not be fought by me, by Boaz, my colleague here. It's a whole collective effort, so that at the end of the day, we all hold ourselves accountable to the results we want to achieve.
And picking on that point about waste management and the bigger conversation about conservation of the environment, in Kenya, our policies, I mean, you don't find, even in the estates where people live, you don't find a lot of isolation of waste, even at the point of discarding whatever you're discarding. What is wrong with us?
That's an interesting one. Yeah, I think it goes back to where it all starts for me is our culture. Our culture, individual culture, is a problem first. And it goes back to ownership. How have we been taught to throw waste? I had the privilege of growing up where we actually had a compost. So for me, I knew waste was to be thrown in a compost. But also the same waste should find plastic waste going into the compost. That is still not good for the environment. But if we're able to get it to a point that actually you could have your own way to segregate waste first at source, have your own bins. I say like you could get some little soil, put in a dustbin, get some food waste, put it in there. What do you have at the end of the day? You get manure. What can you use the manure to do? Probably even as an estate, you can aggregate that manure, use it for your gardens, probably sell it. You can find something creative to do around it. So first for me is we have to look at our culture and how we handle the whole matter related to how we handle waste. Because it is very clear we have waste collectors, but the conversation should not end at waste collectors. It's a whole loop system. So actually, it should be something to do with how they could productively use waste. Look at how you can change waste to energy. You look at how you can change waste to fertilizer. Look at how waste is actually wealth. But for now and how we have our policies designed, the level of waste we have like at Dandora dam site could actually be seen as how then we could leverage on it to convert it into an energy plant. But as a nation, we have talked about it. But the biggest question is, what is stopping us from action in it? Yeah.
Wow, interesting. Boss, is there a way there? Because I would imagine it takes a lot of investment to convert a dam site into a source of energy, but also inculcating that behavior. We may not have grown up segregating waste, but it is important now. Are there quicker ways of getting there?
You know, what Benjamin is saying is extremely interesting, because when you talk about how do we manage our waste, but even the contribution of that waste, and I like the point where you said it's a cultural behavior, it's a cultural issue. And in one of the books that you read, you find what is culture? Culture is the collective behavior of the leaders of the society. Because when I see that anybody can do anything and gets away with it, then I don't find any challenge by also me throwing something anyhow, because there is no penalty. So it goes back to are there specific policies? How are they being enforced? At one stage, I think, and this is just to applaud the Kenya government at the time, making sure that there is zero tolerance to use of plastics, for example, whether you're coming into the country. But has that been consistent? And one of the big things that we talk about is the lack of consistency of enforcing a policy, such that the culture and the behavior of society begins to know that this is actually not right. Not because I fear to be arrested or the enforcement agency will challenge me, but it becomes culturally impossible for me to be doing something and throwing waste anyhow. So the good point you're raising there, what can we do differently? We've seen actually models and approaches now, and these are some of the new models and technologies that we're beginning to see on the continent, right, in terms of how do you convert waste into other productive areas that you can be. You talked about the black insect flies, producing animal protein from food waste and food loss, and begin to generate and produce black soldier flies that can actually be used for poultry and others. So there is an incentive there. What does that mean? Investment, money, the idea, and the science. And we're beginning to see this. We're beginning to collaborate with some of the city mayors in different countries to really convert waste management and waste itself into where you can generate black soldier fly. You are reducing emissions, because one of the big emitters in this space is actually waste itself. You are reducing greenhouse gas emissions. You are generating a product that can be used as an animal protein, either for poultry, for livestock, and others. And therefore, you're able to really sustainably grow the environment without being disruptive in the society. It requires policies, it requires laws, it requires enforcement, it requires consistency. So there's nobody who can tell you that these things will happen by themselves. Policies to attract investment in that space, showcase the model that is working. 2, policies that can actually enforce avoiding behavior and practices that people can actually throw any waste anyhow. And by this time, one of the countries, and I think we talked to the city mayor of Kigali, that's where we're starting with one of these big projects of waste management. It is going to be comparing that you are rushing to get on any type of food waste into a convertible product. We discovered that on a regular basis, on a daily basis, 1 million liters of milk is wasted. And that is a huge ingredient for the black soldier flies that you talked about, Benjamin. So you can see there are models out there, but the investors may not be knowing where these models are. The other thing is that even when the models exist, what is the business case? Does this make any economic and business sense? So what we try to do as organizations like Agora is helping a country to develop and put that into a business model that gives an incentive for the private sector to invest. There is business inherent in the sense. Then you work with the government to make sure that the policies, laws, regulations are protecting and enhancing that kind of behavior. And then the whole agricultural sector and the agricultural food system grows. Everybody benefits. And you talked about a good point earlier that you begin to create opportunities for jobs, for youth, So it's a multifaceted kind of approach that you can not only grow that part of the business, but to create jobs, grow the sector, and make sure that you are growing sustainably and the environment is cleaner.
Yeah. And Emmanuel, the other part of conserving the environment has been about changing what is behind you there. Mm-hmm. Planting of trees, and the country we've been talking about, we're now at 12% tree cover. The target, according to the constitution, the minimum rather should be 10%. And I think the forest cover is about 8%, if I'm not mistaken. And there's a plan to plant 15 billion trees in 10 years' time. Are there thoughts around this? What trees, or is it just plant?
The essence of having trees is that they sequester the carbon that is emitted into the air. Yeah. So once they take it in, it goes all the way to the soil, and people can still breathe fresh air and keep on living healthy. But the thing about planting 15 billion trees is a bit ambitious, because at the same time, just recently, the government lifted the ban on tree logging. So people are going to cut trees. So if we are going to cut more trees and we need to plant more trees, and trees take years to grow, what are you going to achieve at the end of the day? Because we have to even consider the type of tree, like you've mentioned. We don't know the type of tree that people are going to plant, because we know we have some trees which actually consume a lot of water, and that is not good for the environment as well. And we're supposed to have these trees grow over a certain period of years, say 10, 15, 20 years. Now, within this type of years, this number of years, and we are having a very small percentage of tree cover in the country, we're going to have a huge problem. Because if we cut, let's say, a quarter of the trees that are presently in the country, and then we plant several others, by the time these trees mature enough, we will have so many other trees still cut. So we will realize that maybe 20 years from now, we're going to have 5% cover compared to our neighboring countries, which actually have so many trees at the same rate as ours. So I think it's ambitious, it's possible, and it's also doable. If we can encourage schools which have got enough land to keep on planting trees, hospitals. Yesterday I had a conversation with someone while taking my budget at Charter Hall, and he's an old guy. So he told me that during the old ages, the chiefs and sub-chiefs were required by the government to plant trees and have some sort of tree nursery. So every chief's office at least had something that was growing there. Mm-hmm. And at the moment, we don't have these types of trees anymore. I think, no one really cares. I think everything went away when Wangari Maathai died. I'm not so sure. But I think it's something that we can really work on if we really need to know. We need to move to that direction. But we first have to identify the types of trees that we need, and the benefits. We have to encourage people. We have to, empower people to know that if we plant a tree, it's going to help us in this way and that way. Mm-hmm. At least people should have that knowledge that a tree is important somewhere. Okay. Yeah.
Interesting. Benjamin, so are there innovative ways of achieving this? Because he raises a point that children can plant trees. I remember planting trees while I was in primary school. Are there innovative ways to make these faster, more affordable, without spending so much of budget in the national government?
Yeah, thank you. We do have the solutions available. I think, first for me, I try to change the whole notion. Mm-hmm. It's not about planting trees, it's about growing trees. I feel planting trees is an event. We'll say we'll plant 15 billion trees. We can plant them today, but we want to hear about their survival rates. We want to hear at the end of 20 years, at the end of 5 years, what do the survival rates look like? So for me, it's more of like, how do we grow trees? From there, then we can talk about how we've grown plantations and the likes. Back to your question in regards to how we could do it, how better we could do it, how smarter we could do it. Locally, we already have tools available for this. For example, we have a site matching species tool. And what does this assist you to do? It can assist you to know right out here, if you are to plant a tree, which is the right tree to plant. Because you have to consider also things like how deep the roots will go, because then also that affects like infrastructure, architecture. In terms of like specific regions, which are the ideal trees to plant. So I feel it is something that is actually doable. I have had the opportunity to support and lead a number of locally designed programs that are supporting in commercial forestry. And maybe one of the things to also mention is also for KCAC, interestingly, nature-based solutions is one of the key things that stands out for us. As I initially said, for this summit, we have to walk the talk. For us, it is very key. It doesn't end at this summit. Come next month, between 4th to 6th October, we have an investment summit. What are we looking at? We are looking at innovations which we have supported locally across the 5 sectors of commercial forestry, waste, water, renewable energy, and agribusiness to actually support them with investors and link them to investors. We have played a part in terms of de-risking them. So we are very confident that investors would be able to get ideal innovations to support. But if we look at initial campaigns like we had, like Adopt a Light, we need to push these conversations further and say, why can't we adopt a tree? Why can't we adopt trees? I have worked with youth who are actually doing nurseries, have incorporated technologies in terms of planting seedlings. If we are doing things like grafting, we can actually reduce time to get seedlings or trees to grow. We can be able to incorporate technologies like silviculture around the likes to get in terms of the best tissues for trees, and all technologies resulting in that. There's a big challenge in terms of access to market. I go to a number of seedling nurseries whereby actually seedlings are there, but there is no market. And one of the calls has been, how can we have the youth who are doing that being linked up with government, being linked up with corporates, in terms of their social corporate responsibilities? To what extent can they be involved? Because some of these youth are willing to give out even these seedlings, because if they stay in their nurseries, at the end of the day, it might end up as waste. So actually, we have the seedlings. So it's now for us to go back and look. We have tools that can match these seedlings to the right places that they need to be grown. Then how do we actually get to have that happen? But also there is the commercial side of it. These are youth, these are farmers who are in business. They also want to make money. So from our end, we have strengthened them in terms of having solid business models. But the aspect of commercialization is also now key in terms of investing in them, assisting them to get markets. And collaboratively, I feel, with all partners in this ecosystem, we can actually be able to achieve the same.
When you look at those young people, what sort of trees are they growing? Are they those for aesthetics? Are they for forestation? Or are they for fruits? And who are the key markets?
Yeah, so it cuts across. All of these trees, the seedlings are available, be it if you want anything to put on your balcony, you want to put something in your house, you want to grow something on your driveway, you want to plant a plantation of forest, that is available. The local market is also available here. I think the interesting time is, of course, people tend to buy more during the rainy season, because then that aspect of growing a tree is involving a lot of water usage and nurturing it. So you'll have people actually buying these trees, but you'll tend to realize there is more of that being done in the not arid and semi-arid regions, because then growing that tree takes a lot. But actually, if they're able to have access to water, practice climate smart agriculture, I found a local interest in innovation, whereby one of our local entrepreneurs has a box whereby it has all the nutrients related to growing a plant or a tree. And actually, you could just be able to do that in a semi-arid land. The whole box will be able to decompose in the ground. And based on a pilot that was done in Nanyuki, they had over a survival rate of, I think, 87%, which is quite interesting. So back to the question, for me, I feel these solutions are there at the end of the day.
All right.
Yeah, we need to probably invest more in our local solutions. We also need to learn from available international solutions and leverage on technology transfer. But one of the key ways to grow our local innovations is to also have confidence in them. Yeah.
Boss, I imagine that Uganda has a better tree cover than Kenya. What's the secret?
I don't think I confirmed that data statistic, but I think the secret, whether it's Kenya, whether Uganda, it starts with the original land formations and the quality and the type of soils that are able to encourage different types of trees. Because I actually have a different narrative. I had actually thought that during the times of Wangari Maathai, I think the times of Moi here in Kenya, there were deliberate policies for planting trees. When I drive all the way to Naivasha, the landscape that I see, I ask those questions. What actually defines this kind of type of landscape in terms of trees? And the story I get back is that at the time, there were specific policies, massive dedication to say you must plant trees. So it's an important thing. The secret for me is policy. Government must be very, very deliberate. Mm-hmm. And I like the explanations you are giving in terms of it's not either or. Different soil environments attract different types of trees. And the science is there to tell which kind of trees should be growing where. Mm-hmm. Today we have approaches that can be able to use, for example, fruit trees and benefit both on not only getting out of the fruits and the benefit that come with it, but you're also managing the environment. So I think Uganda has been very well versed. You remember before we were born, it's called the Pearl of Africa, very close to Congo, large forests, including very well volcanic soils that have allowed regrowth of different vegetation. Water bodies are huge, and therefore the ability to release more right amount of oxygen and grow the environment has been in the favor of that country. I could say that's God's plan, but things have changed. Things have changed. That breadth and the health of the ecosystem is no longer the case. So you cannot just continue doing business as usual if you don't plant more trees. In southwestern Uganda, where I come from, we used to really have a lot of water bodies. We used to have a lot of, the wetlands have been encroached and have been really turned into farms. There is no longer amount of rivers and water that can really continue to show the health of the environment. So we've disrupted the environment ourselves. Our man-made cultural behavioral practices can actually destroy the environment. And that it shouldn't stop there. And that's why we're really looking up to such discussions. Climate summits like these, and we've come from a history of leaders meeting and making declarations and then going back to do business as usual. I think as actors in this space, we need really to continue creating instruments of accountability. What does it make to come here and say, we will just do this for the sake of climate? And I like President Ruto's comments when he says we have an opportunity to read the word on showcasing that we can industrialize, we can do many things without disrupting the environment. And that's why I called it a global summit, because it's showing the global world, what can Africa do? What can we do differently without disrupting the environment? But I think we need to also take in the challenge that we've been talking about, that it's not just a mere about talking about planting a tree, it's growing a tree. And that has to come from a cultural behavior that we cultivate amongst people, young, old, middle, and young, female, male. It has to be a cultural behavior. Okay. My last point there is we are moving into the COP28, and the United Arab Emirates will be the presidents of the current COP28. Previous conference of parties were dominated by negotiators that did not have the understanding of the science of health that we just talked about, the food and nutrition security, the food system thinking. The reason we are proud and we are really trying to make sure the Kenya Climate Summit, the Africa Climate Summit hosted by Kenya, to really be instrumental, is showcasing some of these models that are working. How can we really go into the COP28 with practical cases that have been able to demonstrate where success lies and be able to tap into some of these global resources that people are talking about? Every climate summit you hear about financial commitments, adaptation finance, mitigation finance. Intentionally, well-intentioned that if you are practicing adaptation techniques, to adapt to the environment, or you are mitigating and changing the climate, here are financial resources that are going to help you scale those up. But where are those resources? Most of this money that is announced is not new money. It's recycled money. But we have accountability mechanisms that are able to trace back and say the money that is being announced are actually new money. So that's where really we want to challenge ourselves and challenge our leaders. And this is not a business for leaders and government alone. It's a private sector. It's the civil society. It's the farmers themselves. It's governments. So it's a collective effort that we all need to put our heads together to make sure that this becomes a reality rather than, again, another talk show.
Okay. I need to tie this, and I don't know who answers this, whether it's Benjamin or it's Emmanuel, because, yes, you speak against logging because it will undo the efforts that are being attempted here. But then again, there are communities that survive on forests. Talking about timber and timber products, if it's a furniture production or whatever that may be. So what do we do with that? But how also can we, yes, grow trees, but at the same time sustainably manage the forest?
I can take it first. Then he can add. Yeah. So we have to acknowledge in terms of livelihoods, forestry is a big contributor to the same. There's that nexus between forestry, agroforestry. I think right now we are seeing regenerative agroforestry gaining traction, which is good. So actually you can be able to grow trees, be it fruit trees, but also cultivate food that you want to eat. On the other side, when we look at the aspect to say of using like timber products to be able to make, be it furniture and the likes, we cannot overlook that probably we still need that sector. It's employing a number of people, but we need to drive the conversation to how can they do it sustainably. Okay. Sustainably for them to be able to understand that there should be an agreed threshold in terms of how they are doing logging. Way back, we used to say if you cut a tree, I think you plant 2 or 3 trees. To what extent are we pushing this so that actually we have sort of growing trees in a modular system? But also we have alternatives. One of the key things we need to look at is like bamboo. Bamboo is a resource that actually, when you look at even in construction, bamboo is something that is used to, when you see like when they're doing buildings and they're putting up steel structures on the side for them to be able to reinforce and climb up the other floors, that is something bamboo could do. So you see there's that alternative. When you look at furniture, there's actually furniture that can be done from bamboo. And bamboo is one of those sustainable alternatives in terms of how it could grow its direct contribution towards even maintaining ecosystems like the rivers and the likes. It's something that we could adopt. So those solutions are there. Pushing that further, when you look at it, another interesting subsector that we need to look at forestry and actually see how we could invest more into it is the non-timber forest side of it. Why? Take local who is in an arid area, case and point like in the regions of Garissa and the likes. Rather than cutting those trees for timber, they could actually harvest things like gum, Arabic, and resins. These even have much more value than the timber itself. And what we probably just need locally is for industries to be strengthened, because currently you'd find majority of it is being exported out of the country for processing. Right. But if we were to have that industry there, then actually it would be able to support the locals who are there.
Okay, and of course we've had the president saying that he has banned importation of furniture, while the budget 2023-2024 and the Finance Act introduced a higher tax on imported furniture. So I don't know whether it's banning or it's introduction of a tax. I want us to take a look at the feedback that has come to us. Then we'll spend some little time to quickly go through renewable energy and the concerns that are there. Brian Chamo is saying that many decisions made today have long-term consequences that will affect the younger generation. Involving young people in decision-making ensures that their interests and concerns are considered, leading to more sustainable and equitable future. Babu Michael, for the Africa Climate Summit 2023 to be all-inclusive, I hope all the concerns could be addressed. For instance, the issues raised by the non-state actors. Climatic issues are touching on everyone, and so everyone must be brought on board. Win-win situation. All right. And Okelo Mwalimu is saying that I'm looking forward to an ACS where African leaders would adopt more practical approaches as opposed to usual theoretical ones in mitigating climate change crisis. For instance, I hope heads of states, will agree to abandon gas guzzlers for eco-friendly electric cars. All right. This is Remy Botia. ACS should be an opportunity to chart the continent's direction towards an equitable and sustainable future that protects people and communities and prepare a coordinated front from African leaders to call for a first phase out of all fossil fuels. All right. And Sir Nixon Dugire, Proverbs 14:23, in hard work there is always profit, but too much chattering leads to poverty. Mending forests will bear profits. Too much climate talk in the midst of destroying forest and permitting heavy logging leads to poverty. All right, Nixon. And Wainaina, you're saying that a singular note can transform a melody. So can Africa alter the world's climate change song? The summit in Nairobi is our chance to compose a refrain of hope and sustainability. What a way to give that comment. Now, Benjamin, you said that you're also in the area of renewable energy. You know, it's very expensive to really produce renewable energy. For instance, if you had to look at the investment that went into Lake Turkana wind power and then the transmission lines that have to be put in place, it was such a big conversation because it took a bit of time. Yeah. And Kenya lost a bit of resources there. Then also, if you look at the power mix in Kenya, yes, we are told, the government says 93% is renewable energy. When you look at the specifics on what Kenya Power buys, it is not as high. It's just about close to 80, above 70 years. But there's still a lot of thermal energy being produced. Is it possible to keep going into renewable energy in rates that are affordable? And is the question about the national grid, or is it communities empowering themselves? Where do you see first again?
Yeah, so first and foremost, maybe I'd like to just acknowledge, I think for a country, in terms of renewable energy, we have achieved a lot of milestones in terms of the same. From my statistics and research, when I look at it, we are at over 80%, which is good, because then for other countries, then they're still struggling to get at that. But the biggest challenge is we still have to talk about last mile connectivity in Kenya. Why? Because there are people who are in rural areas who actually don't have access to electricity. Mm-hmm. And also for some, the affordability is also an issue. So we need to look at it from a way whereby even local innovators, mm-hmm. Like right now we see the push and pull between government, between the independent power producers, and the different allocations of the price points for each. But then also there is that which has been done right now in terms of being able to close that so that there are no new ones coming on board. But actually, if we're able to see it from a point whereby we're able to sustainably produce power at a very cost-efficient way, at the end of the day, we would be able to have affordable electricity. I had the privilege of being in Denmark early on in the year, and it was very interesting. As a household, I can have my own energy, and this is even like just wind power, because this is a free resource. But at the end of the day, I will produce more than I need. But what happens to it? It goes to the national grid. So the first thing is that these are things that are doable. So it's not rocket science we are talking about. Mm-hmm. But then also, how does it supplement me? I'm actually making some income from it at the end of the day, because I have to put some power in the grid. So I think for me, we take a step back. And I think one thing that comes out clearly in this table is policies. We just need to have favorable policies. It's not about policies. Right. It's about favorable policies, so that actually in terms of accessing power, these are basic resources, because then in terms of being able to factors of production, where will you get power? You need to get power at a very affordable rate. Investors are sometimes complaining about the high cost of energy locally, and that is something that then actually would be eaten into their revenue streams. So it's for us as a nation to actually look at how then can we be able to incentivize those who are bringing up such innovations. If people are actually able to build their own mini hydro projects, for example, when you go to islands in Lake Victoria, I've had the privilege of going like to Kiwa Island. Mm-hmm. Initially, there wasn't any power there, but then you tend to find local investors actually come and put it up. So to what extent can we be able to incentivize such like innovators so that this whole power thing stops becoming a monopoly, but then we're able to have as much as independent players or private players in the space, so that at the end of the day, every person in terms of inclusion can be able to have access to affordable power.
Right. Yeah. Your thoughts, Emmanuel, into this renewable energy conversation, how best you can tackle it?
Well, I think renewable energy is the way to go. Years to come, we're no longer going to be using fossil fuels. We're going to limit our use in it. So we need to have alternatives where we have already wind power, we have solar power, we have also the things that can be generated within locally, like the biogas. They usually work quite well. So you realize that after some time, we are supposed to focus on having a better climate for the people so that our health cannot be affected. And one of the things that affect our health most of the time is pollution which comes from different sources, mainly fossil fuels. So if we want to move on forward, we first need to find a way of how we can tap this renewable energy into our system. I had a conversation with a guy from Rome, the ones who make electric buses, and they were doing a project for ICRC where they are converting Land Cruisers into electric vehicles. And this guy told me that one of the things that they use is actually solar power. You can charge your vehicle during the day and it works perfectly well. So if you're going electric, if you're trying to move towards a greener world, we need to look at certain things. For example, solar power. If you can generate your own power at home and it's going to be in excess, you should be allowed to sell. Like my fellow colleague has said, that you can also sell to the national grid. There are countries that usually do that. So we need stronger policies to encourage such things that can work.
I hear you, but that's largely what you are talking about addresses what is just above us.
Yeah.
The mobility question, whether it's the car you use or the bus you use or the aeroplane you use, I don't know that there will be electric planes at some point. How do we make that conversation a reality? Because if you had to try and buy, I saw an electric motorbike, it's about 170,000, reduced from 270,000. It's still pricey if it's compared to what currently we're using with fuel. How do we make that a reality?
One thing I've noticed is that we're moving so fast without allowing room for innovation. So we are pushing for policies on the global scale, like having the climate summit. We have the COPs, we have different meetings like the IPCC ones. And then you realize that we are not allowing people to come up with innovative solutions. So I don't think there's need for us to really rush if we cannot do anything at the moment. We should promote the local ideas. For instance, there's a time I was thinking, just in my mind, if it's possible to convert the fumes from a vehicle into something that is solid, that can be used for maybe road construction or can be used somewhere else. And then I came across this channel on YouTube from an Indian guy who did the same thing. He converted the gases from the exhaust pipe of his vehicle into something that can be used for something else. It can be a raw material for something else, but he doesn't have any funding. And that is one of the things that we're supposed to come up with. If we're supposed to move towards a climate neutral environment, we need to also implement local solutions. We need to look for local ideas. We don't need to rush and find solutions through climate summits like this one here, where we are going to discuss about things on a global scale, on a national scale. We need to narrow it down. I've been reading the newspaper, and there's a place where people are complaining because they haven't been involved in this climate summit. We have the people who are most affected, people from northern Kenya. They're not included in this climate summit. And these are the people who are supposed to be here so that they can talk and express their opinions. The suggestions that they have is something that we really need to focus on. Okay. Yeah, so that we can build.
I hear that, because when you look at the, excuse me, the import-export market in the country, 24% of our imports are fuel, petroleum products.
Yeah.
So now we are transitioning from vehicles that use fuel to electric, but they're all imported. So that component of importation is still remains high.
Yeah.
So, and as you're saying that we look for local solutions, do you think it's a possibility in the sort of governance that we have, the political economy that we have?
I think the political aspect is going to be a very tricky solution because, you know, there are big players in the market, but it's possible. Let me give an illustration. Why do we need to import electric buses when they're fully assembled, yet we can import the parts here and assemble them here? And then doing that, we're going to encourage more people to have an idea of this thing is possible. So we can also do the same thing in our own country. We don't need to import everything from outside.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Excuse me. This is a sign that you need to end it there. And I have to thank you all. Boz from Agra, Benjamin from KICC. KCSC rather, and Emmanuel Yusuf for making time for us to have this conversation today at the start of the Africa Climate Summit. I hope you've gotten something that is of use to you as you try to understand the whole conversation on why we need to be paying attention for now. And that's our time here on Daybreak, which is Citizen Planet. Up next is Potty Monday. They'll be telling you about the 3 things that happened yesterday that are very important. And congratulations to Arsenal. It's so bad for Manchester United. My name is Sam Kituku. See you again tomorrow.